We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Randall, thanks for coming back on. This is
Morning,
episode
Brian.
3. Yeah, it's episode 3 for everybody listening in reference to Randall Bennett as my guest. Go back and listen to the other episodes. We cover a lot. He's got a crazy background. When you hear him talking, he's just so humble and great voice. But I love hearing about his background. He's documented it in a book, Taking Up the Sword. We talked about it in the last 2 episodes. I encourage everybody to buy it and read it. And we're going to jump into this phase or this slice of your career. And I was heavily interested in your time spent in Iraq. And if you can, just kind of dive right in there and kind of tell everybody about it.
Absolutely. I had a lot of great assignments, but Iraq was probably the biggest one. And let me mention a little bit about the preparation for it. We did a lot of high threat tactical training in preparation for going to Iraq, and everybody did. It's a lot of physical preparation, but also you had to learn what was going on there and how to deal with the politics, and also the politics was odd because you had a lot of people in Washington that were saying, we need to be out of there. We need to stop having contractors. We need to stop getting in shootouts. They had no idea what was going on. But the training was exceptional. We did a lot of, we actually, even though it was Iraq, and Iraq is known to be a desert country, we literally were doing our shooting in Virginia, laying on the ground in snow and sleet storms. So it was a little bit odd, but it was all preparation. And one of the things we had to do, and at that point I was 56 and going to what was going to be my 4th war. But this one I was going to be in charge of the 2nd largest army in Iraq. And so I had such good guys that worked for me. One of the things we had to do was a 2.5-mile run, and there was a bit of a hill as well. And being at that age and having an artificial knee at this point, I was going to give it my best, but I knew that I wasn't going to keep up with the 25-year-olds. And so as we took off running, I remember one guy who had been a champion of his state, one hell of a runner. And as I'm still going the first direction, he has made it to the end, turned around, and he's passing me going back to the finish line. And the type of character of these people, he got to the finish line, he turned around, and he came running back again. By this time, I have made it to the end, and I've turned around. But he came back, and he ran alongside me, encouraging me continually to make it, go faster, keep going. And this was the type of people that I had working for me. They were just such good-hearted people. They knew what the risks were. And it was something that they knew was of value to America, to the nation, and to the team. So in Iraq, we were positioned all throughout the country. I had people in the north, I had people in the south, and Baghdad is located in the center. And in the center, I had 3 contractor groups that were working for me. One group was assigned to the north, one was assigned to the south, and one was assigned to the central, where Baghdad was. And it was Blackwater, DynCorp, and Triple Canopy. And in the center was Blackwater. And so Blackwater also were my helicopter pilots and my mechanics, because I had a number. At that point, when I first got there, we had 4 helicopters, 2 little birds and 2 medium lifts.
Okay.
And they would run some oversight when we were doing high threat protection work on certain officers. But before I had gone out there, our assistant secretary had pulled me aside and he said, Randall, we've got about 450 vehicles, armored vehicles in country, and we can only account for about 300 of them. I need you to go out there and find all of them. Where are they? He said, we also are having a problem because we have people that are doing work with the locals to try and teach them how to be productive. We're essentially creating jobs for them that would be constructive to the development of Iraq. He said, I'm going to give you another $250 million, and I want you to go out there and figure out how to get these people safely from point A to point B and back. And so my annual budget was $1 billion. It was giving me an additional 25% of that just to figure out a way to get these people safely about the business they had to do. In searching for a way to do it, because all the roads that we were traveling on, either the roads themselves had mines or mines were being triggered from the sides of the road to detonate our vehicles and kill our people. So after researching it and trying to figure out how best to do it, I realized that we could station some of our hardened vehicles, our ballistic resistant vehicles, at positions close to the towns that we had to go to. And I bought 22 helicopters with the money he gave me. So we would lift off out of Baghdad from where the embassy was, which was Saddam's palace. And we would fly to where the cars were and then just drive a short distance into the town, do business, come back, and fly back home again. And so we ended up with a fleet of 22 helicopters total.
Can I interrupt just for a split second?
Yeah.
Can you say, like, how do you acquire or buy 22 helicopters when you're already in country here?
I mean, what I do is because my pilots and my mechanics were Blackwater.
Okay.
So that's Eric Prince. Eric Prince had a connection to the purchase of these because our pilots and our mechanics and helicopters were on a contract basis. And so we bought the helicopters through the State Department. They had them shipped, and at that point, Blackwater took responsibility for them to maintain them and to fly them, which required additional pilots as well. But it saved a lot of lives because we didn't have to do those over-road travel. And some of the other countries, the other personnel, the other protective agents, like especially the South Africans, they were running the roads and they were continually getting blown up. So it was really precarious for a while. But this solved a lot of problems, and it also gave me a greater access to the entire country to go visit all my people and make sure that the assistant regional security officer or the regional security officer in Mosul or Basra or Kirkuk, that their security was properly in place and that they were doing what they needed to do to protect their little community of Americans, employees as well as contractors. So the helicopters, which you always take more than one, of course, because you sometimes have to cross load if one goes down. So you've got to have a backup plan. But it was usually two little birds, and the little birds were used as gunships. They did the protection work for the medium lifts, which carried the people. To be honest with you, I really preferred the little birds because they were so flexible and so much more fun. When I first landed in Baghdad, they picked me up at the airport. They didn't want me running the road on Route Irish, which was a big attack zone. But they picked me up, and they were going to test out the new boss. Well, these pilots were amazing. They were just so good. but they did zig and zag and up and down and loops that I didn't think were even possible from a physics perspective, trying to make me throw up.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for me, I, and for I think most boys, most men, we enjoy that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was terrific. But I found out that I had some pilots, which I was told that in Black Hawk Down, the particular group that were the helicopter pilots that got in trouble there, that those individuals got out of the service, became contractors for Blackwater, and were now some of the pilots that I had. So they were very experienced, very capable,
Mm-hmm.
and would take me around the country when I needed to go, which was phenomenal.
Yeah, it makes sense when you were talking about that. The first assumption was, I thought, okay, that's got to be like prior 160th Special Operations Aviation Unit, that then get out and get hired to fly like that, because I don't know anyone else that knows how to do those things that they know how to do. So, and it is incredible for people when Randall's talking about the Little Bird, or those like very small, looks almost like a bubble type of helicopter.
Yeah.
And they can just kind of get in and out of urban areas. And
there's
I
only
don't
room
know.
for a pilot, a co-pilot, and 2 door gunners.
Mm-hmm.
But I liked to be hooked up to a strap in one of the door gunner spots, so that when he banked left or right, you're hanging out of the helicopter looking straight down. Because that, you got to get your thrills where you can.
Right. And you fully trust that harness, because as soon as it snaps, well,
what are you going to do?
Yeah. So now real quick, one thing I'd like to say is great leadership. It mostly involves someone who cares enough about their people and then actually is a problem solver. So it sounds like once you got in there and you were given the problem, no one said, hey, this is how I want you to solve this. They just said, hey, solve this problem for us. And you quickly I say quickly, but you assessed it and then got things in play. And I want to say, it sounds like the top priority was to ensure the lives of your people. And if that costs $250 million,
absolutely,
then, oh, well, yeah, if it means we got to acquire helicopters, then that's what we're going to do. If it means hiring on more pilots, then that's what we're going to do. But hey, guess what? We have technology and we have people who have the skills to take a machine and take off from one base, land in an area out in the field, and then extract back safely, as opposed to doing the same route and setting off, detonations and things like that. I don't want to say, I don't want to say that like leadership is easy, because it's not, but it does just come down to that. You know what your priorities are. It's either to, save lives of your people and to better their work conditions. And that's basically about it,
And I can't say what diplomatic security service is like today, because I've been out for a decade, but because I had been in every place I went, blew up or was attacked or whatever. So I had a lot of experience, and I think DS trusted me because they gave me a great deal of autonomy, which is to your point. With Karachi, I ran my investigations the way I felt needed to be done. And even when it might have appeared that I was stepping out of line for a U.S. federal agent in some foreign country, President Bush stepped in and backed me up and told him to leave me alone. And it was the same with Iraq. I had a great deal of autonomy there. They said, here's the money. This is what we need you to accomplish. Go do it. And as long as you maintain communication with headquarters, everybody's comfortable. And we accomplished that mission. We also found out where all the armored vehicles had gone. They had been used in a lot of them had been used as sort of a barter. We found Iraqi ministers that were being driven around in our armored vehicles because to gain their support, they had been given an armored vehicle to protect them while they're driving around. And all I had to do was identify where they all were, and I think we only were missing a couple of them. And the likelihood was that they were blown up and just unaccounted for at the time.
Yeah.
So yes, autonomy. I have to give kudos to diplomatic security service. In the FBI, they micromanage minutia. Their agents are terrified to make a move, or at least they used to be, because their management was always on them, very picky and they're very critical of the things that they did. And DS would say, "Here's what we want, go do it."
Yeah.
And I was allowed to, and I couldn't have asked for anything better than that. So, diplomatic security service understood, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, that I when you bring up that comparison, I've had a lot of people say when they show an interest in any kind of law enforcement early on, and they'll say stuff like, "Well, I kind of want to be an FBI agent," and I always ask them like, "Well, what is it that draws you to law enforcement?
Yeah.
Is it whatever status, or is it that you want to do work, and what type of work do you want to do?" And inevitably, it is TV shows that kind of give them that image that you're going to be getting in car chases and kicking
False
doors
image.
in. Yeah. And it's like, well, if you want to get in car chases and kick doors in, go be a local cop, because you're going to get plenty of that. If you want to do long-term investigations, if you want to get, in depth and in potentially, anti-terrorism work or, organized crime, that sort of thing. Yeah. Push towards wanting to be an FBI agent.
A lot of financial.
Yeah, exactly. And my thing is, like you just said, when higher ups micromanage you or have a culture where you can't kind of move freely and make decisions and investigate and do what you need to do, I don't know how anyone thrives in that situation. And what ends up happening over 10, 15, 20 years of that type of culture is, I don't want to say becomes obsolete, but it starts to create employees or agents who really aren't what that career was built on. And the reason I say all that is there's a lot of changes coming up that we're going to see in the next few years that will be historical. I think just like we've seen, back in the 60s, in the 20s and 30s. Anytime an organization starts to get like that, stagnant or political, which is absolutely crazy, there has to be a shift. I think that's what's going to happen here pretty soon. I also think that coupled with more of a proactive approach, again, in law enforcement, is going to bring those two worlds back together a lot faster, I think, than what people are expecting. So
when an individual is micromanaged on his job, especially when you're in the field and thousands of miles away from headquarters, but you're being micromanaged, then what happens, and this applies to even in a field office, you start to make the decisions that you need to make based at least 50% on covering your ass. Bless you.
Thank you.
on covering your ass, because you're being watched too closely, micromanaged, and that one little thing with your boss doesn't like it because he's trying to keep his ass protected. And so, as we all know, it all runs downhill. So you're going to take the blame for anything that he may have told you to do, and you just didn't do it the way that he had hoped it would turn out.
Yeah,
you can't micromanage.
Yeah, and I would say this: I have to imagine, anyone that worked with you as they moved up through the ranks saw that type of leadership, and probably, I would assume, did really well if they were those problem solvers like that. And I will say this for people who are listening: if you're in leadership or you're interested in getting the leadership, and you plan to do something that you already know is a little bit different I'm not saying violating your policies or anything, just something a little bit different than everybody else is doing. Sometimes just brief up the chain. Tell, your supervisor, hey, this is how I'm going to address this issue. It hasn't been done this way before, but understand that these are my contingency plans and I'll put them in place. I've already accounted for whatever budget, if money's involved, I've already, accounted for staffing numbers. It's not going to affect these other units, brief up the chain, at least in my experience. When I've done that, once I've done that, then your higher echelon don't spin out of control when you've done something to solve a problem fully within policies, but they just didn't come up with the idea.
Communicating is the key to success. It really is.
Yeah.
My degree is in business management. And one of the principles that we studied was called learn, do, teach. You learn the job that you're currently at, and you do that job. But you have to learn the one that's above you as well if you ever have any hope of moving up. And a good leader will make sure that those opportunities exist for your subordinates to see what's happening in your job and how you handle it, and maybe even sitting in on some high-level meetings so they can understand that when you go to a country team, the ambassador and the generals and every section or agency leader is there, that this is how you have to behave and how you deal with your responsibilities and interface with them. And with regard to that, you're right. Communication is always the key to success. Proactive communication as well as real-time communicating.
And then there's the philosophy of, well, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. So I leave that in there too, because sometimes you just have to.
We've all practiced that.
Yeah, sometimes you have to go, you have to act, do it, accomplish it. And then usually the supervisor is like, okay, you're good. They didn't.
And prepare your justification in advance so that when they ask you, you can come up with something that makes sense to them.
Yeah. So now when you were in Iraq, you're solving problems. You had kind of thrown it out there earlier, and this is what I love about talking with you. You threw something out there about President Bush. Now, you were at the top of the peak there, and you were saying that you were getting the backing of a president.
Yeah, let me tell you the story about that.
Okay.
In fact, I'll tell you sort of two parts to it. When I was doing the Daniel Pearl case, which we've already talked about, I would get in after the sun had arisen, and I would do my cable back to Washington, telling them what I did that night, the places I raided, the people we captured, the rigorous interrogation techniques that were used and what was derived from them. And into that investigation, probably 4 weeks, I was just exhausted because I was lucky if I was getting 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night, and that was usually with my head on my desk. So I came in from a long, hard night of picking up people and interrogating them, and I fell asleep on my keyboard. And the phone rang, and I said, hello, and he said, where's your cable? And I said, excuse me? He said, where's your cable for last night? And I said, who am I talking to? And he said, this is the White House. And I said, what White House? And he said, this is the president's White House. And the president wants your cable on his desk first thing every morning. It's the first thing he wants to read. And I'll tell you what, if I was asleep before, the adrenaline just surged because I realized that the oversight that was being done on that case was the president's desk. So later in the investigation, and I had been, it wasn't reckless, but I was enthusiastic about my job. And so I was going out at night and I was raiding Al-Qaeda homes. And if the Pakistani team wasn't available, I was doing it myself
Mm-hmm.
because I would get leads and I really wanted to get Danny back. Well, Washington found out what I was doing, and it was the White House and also the State Department, and they started talking. They said, "Wow, this agent, it seems like he's gone rogue. He's out in shootouts at night on the streets of Karachi, Pakistan. He's an American agent. What on earth is going on? We need to yank him back to Washington and teach him how things are done, and that this can't happen this way." And President Bush stepped in and he said, and I'll appreciate him for my entire life for this. He said, "You leave Randall alone. He's doing God's work."
Mm-hmm.
And I've
Mm-hmm.
always treasured that particular bit of input.
Again, back to leadership. When a leader trusts their people and knows that you're making things happen, let Randall do what Randall does.
And later, now I'm in Iraq, he flew out to Iraq and shook my hand and thanked me for the work that I had done on that case, and for what we were doing in Iraq as well, of course. But
yeah,
good leader.
yeah.
A lot of people gave him some crap because he was a lot smarter and a lot smoother in person than sometimes he came off on camera, but had a heart of gold and really looked out for his people.
I've heard that too. And I think that that's part of the way that the news makes their money, because I can remember that, like just constant news clips of him kind of floundering around with words or mixing up a saying or whatever. And it was funny to me, but I also had read his book. I had also read a lot of other books about decisions being made and what was going on at the time. And I do think that probably history will reflect that he was a really good president in that sense, and that he was there when, the towers fell, 9/11, and he had to start making some decisions and putting things in place. And I've always just heard positive things like that, of setting the tone for leadership and letting people do what they need to do. So it's interesting, though, to hear your perspective of it, because I do like that, and I am glad that your work was going across his desk, because that means he cared, not that he was distracted by other things or wasn't plugged in those briefings like that.
Let me tell you what a typical day was like for me in Iraq. First off, we worked. There were no weekends. There were no holidays. We worked 7 days a week, all day long. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And a lot of times you slept in your boots because you never knew when the rockets were going to fall. But I'd get up at 4 and I'd go to the gym. I'd work out for an hour and a half. I'd get home. I'd be showered by 6 and in the office. And during probably an average day, I would have 12 to 13 or 14 meetings that I had to go to. So it was just nonstop. I had 2 wonderful office managers, ladies, who took care of me. And people would want to stop in and file some complaint with the senior RSO or propose something. And I just didn't have time for it, frankly. I had a lot of other lieutenants that could take care of that sort of thing. But I would look out my door when I'd see someone come in, and I'd see them stand up from their chairs and start circling around to protect my doorway so that he couldn't make a rush into my office. They were excellent. They were just really excellent. But I would do my 13 meetings a day, and I'd finish maybe anywhere between 10 p.m. and midnight. And if there was an event going on out by the pool, some military guys were playing their guitars or whatever, I'd try to sit in on that for a little bit. Or we had a bar that was called the Lock and Load, and it was the only bar. And the military couldn't come because they weren't allowed to drink. Absolutely When they're on deployment, no alcohol. And I told my guys, I said, you can drink, but you better never drink more than you are capable of responding to an emergency like a rocket attack. If anybody does that, you're going home. And that meant one drink. And everybody was pretty good about it, because during that year and a couple of months, we had over 350 rocket attacks. Basra had over 1,000. They ended up having to just stay inside their hardened facility, sleep, eat, and work. They just put cots in a hallway, and they just lived inside there because it was too dangerous to be outside. We had a communicator who had, and this is in Basra, nice kid. He said, I just want to go home at lunch, back to my trailer. You can call that a home, but it was better than the hallway. He said, I want to go back. I want to just take a nap on my cot, and then I'll come back to work. And as bizarre as the coincidence seems, a rocket, during that time he was sleeping, a rocket landed right on his trailer. The likelihood being that there was a spotter who identified that, and that somebody was in a trailer and they lobbed a rocket onto him and killed him. And so we went down, we made our way down for a ceremony for him. But it was a hell of a situation. I had to put my strongest person psychologically in Basra, because I knew what they were in for. And to live like that, being continually rocketed. You've got several every day, or a dozen one day and maybe a day off. But even up in Baghdad with 350, we would work until, we'd stay up until about midnight. And I knew that in 4 hours I was going to be up again. I'd go back to my trailer and I would lay down, but I knew that probably around 2 a.m. our rockets were going to begin to fall. And when that happens, I'm back up, I'm out the door, and I've got to find out if anybody's been hit. So I'm checking all our hardened bunkers to see who's in, who's out. And that was an everyday situation. I went for 7 months without a day off before I could get an assistant, a deputy senior RSO, to come in and fill the spot. And I was exhausted. I was just completely drained.
And it seems like it's, this sounds like common sense, but like it's by design to just harass, rocket, similar to like sniper attacks on fire bases and stuff in Vietnam, where it's like, if you can cause that unit to be on 100% security, then now you're taking away, their ability to sleep, their ability to start to make decisions, and be as productive as possible. But it sounds like you all were still able to accomplish your mission and do what was necessary, even though you were still having rockets coming in. And I'm assuming some other units were assigned to work those angles, because, or did y'all also have to, were y'all responsible for that?
We had Big Army, of course.
Okay, yeah.
And Big Army was the response, but politics got involved.
Okay.
And so we had put in what's called a CRAM, a counter rocket and mortar system. And the complete nature of a CRAM is that it's a computerized system, and it will identify a launch of a rocket or a mortar, a missile, exactly where it's taking place, where it's taken off from, and by the trajectory, the computer identifies approximately where it's going to hit. We had to put towers up all over because we zoned out the green zone so that we could say it's going to hit in zone number such and such. And the people in that particular zone would be running faster perhaps than the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part one of the CRAM. Identify the launch and the trajectory and designated point of impact. Point two, though, part two, was of the counter rocket and mortar, was to shoot it down and also target the spot that it was launched from. Politics. Congress said, we don't want you to fire at the rockets or at the spot that it was launched from. We prohibit that because there could be innocent people who get hit by that. So in other words, they were okay with the rockets landing on us, but not us trying to stop them from landing on us because of the potential for some peripheral injury. That's just not the way to run things.
Yeah, and that is one, and I've heard multiple angles of this argument, is that the more collateral damage U.S. forces do, the more you're creating the next generation of terrorists. I understand the long game on that. And I think America has set the tone for decades and decades of warfare, of honing in and doing the least amount of damage as they can, but also in order to save themselves and other citizens around the threat. I also think when a unit knows and can calculate where a rocket comes from, you have to stop it. It in simple terms, it's the same as a person standing in a parking lot with a pistol and they're shooting at citizens. If you have a clear shot, you take the shot. You don't always know what's in the backdrop. You don't always know, if a round's going to go through a car windshield in the backdrop and hit a citizen. You hope not, but also that threat that is firing on other people has to either be stopped by your own bullets, or at least, as we say in the field, like change their channel, get their brain to stop the attack and now go into self-preservation mode, flee for cover. At least that's stopping rounds on the citizens. Same way over there. If a rocket is firing and that unit can triangulate, that's one of those things where I hate in this, without knowing a whole lot more. It's hard for me to understand Congress wanting or saying that, or limiting those rules of engagement when that threat's coming in, and that threat is directly identifying with eyes on American lives and any other lives on that base, and those rockets are coming in. I think a lot of that is articulation and putting the message out there to the world, that, hey, this is why this happened, especially if it, hits the world news that some citizens died in a counter attack from that rocket. It's like, okay, but also Americans can't just sit there and keep getting incoming rockets.
Although we did, but the terrorists are not stupid. They're just evil. Because they would set up these launch points from schools, from mosques, and knowing that we were very sensitive to that. So instead of being able to launch and take out that site and hopefully take out the launcher and the individuals, Big Army would have to get in their vehicles, cross the river, and drive to where the launch site was, the point of launch, and that would be, it could be 40 minutes. Nobody's there by that time.
Yeah.
So it just was kind of a waste. Let me tell you a little bit, though, about what the Iraqi employees went through who worked for us. Because as much as we went through, man, I give great respect to the Iraqis who were helping us. The Iraqis did not like Americans. Obviously, it was tough. They tried to blow us up. They tried to shoot us. They tried to run us off the road. They tried to do everything they could. But there were some individuals who realized that America was trying to clean things up and help them, and even give them some sense of progress. And so they wanted to come to work for the Americans. And they realized also, because we had a deal, you work for us for, I think in Iraq, normally it's 15 years and we're going to give you a green card and send you America. I think Iraq, it was 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
And so there was some real advantage to them in gaining a better life and giving a better life to their families. So they were willing to take the risk, but the risks were horrendous because anybody they knew, any friend, and even their mother, their father, their brothers, their sisters, if they found out they were working for the Americans, they would kill them. So an Iraqi who was working for us would leave in the morning and say he's got a job somewhere. But on the way from where he lived to Saddam's palace where they worked, he would have to change transportation at least 3 times. Each time he changed transportation, he would change his disguise, hoping that nobody recognized him and tracked him coming to the U.S. Embassy, and then he would come in through a back way that we had, hoping that there would not be observation on him. And he would have to reverse that completely when he went home. We had a lot of Iraqi employees who were working for us. At the time I left, the final one that we had been killed. They just were getting killed. In fact, we had a really nice lady who was working in our investigations, translator. You mentioned before how important the translators are, and we couldn't have done the job without them. We don't go there prepared to speak their local language. And at this point, she's the last living Iraqi employee that we have working for us. And she came to us one morning, and I think I was leaving in about a week. And she said, my husband has been kidnapped. And they found his paperwork, because they both worked there, showing that he had his American ID in his bag.
Oh, okay.
And she said, they want $1 million to get him back. And we had to have a terrible heart-to-heart talk with her. And we said, number one, we don't have $1 million. We can try to negotiate this down to something more reasonable, but we don't have money to buy your husband back. And the truth of it is, it's not like Mexico where it's an industry and they know that if they kill the person they kidnap, their business comes to an end. You have to return the person so you can continue to keep the business flowing.
Yeah.
Iraq didn't understand that yet. And so they were killing anybody that they took. And knowing that this guy was working for the Americans, we knew, and we told her, we said, we're really sorry, but they're not going to release him. And she said, but he's my husband. I have to do this. They want me to bring money and meet them. And it was inside a location in town that we couldn't go to. We would, you'd be picked up immediately. We helped her negotiate it down to $50,000. And everybody sort of contributed. But I kept trying to talk her out of doing this. I said, I know he's your husband, but this is not going to work out. She said, but he is my husband and I have to do it. So she went to the site and we had surveillance on her until she went into this zone. And then we couldn't follow anymore. We got a call from her. I guess they had allowed her to make this call because they wanted to instill fear in our hearts and show that they were strong and we were weak. And she said, they opened a refrigerator and showed my husband dead inside it. And she said, and I don't think I'm getting out of here either. And it was a couple of days later, her body washed up on the shore of the river. And that was our last Iraqi employee. It was brutal.
Yeah, it's for people listening, like in other parts of the world, I call them forces, enemy organizations, terrorists, fill in the blank. They operate differently. And like you said, for, cartels, sometimes kidnapping is the business. Other groups do kidnappings out of there, and it is a business, and they know when they return the person, then the word gets out, hey, you just pay the money, you get your person back safely. I was hoping that story was going to end with it actually working out.
We hoped so too, but we knew that it wouldn't.
Yeah.
And we knew that she was just walking in to sacrifice herself, and we'd even told her that. But she said, but it's my husband. I have to do this.
Yeah. So when you've got sources like that and you've got employees that are in country, were there any other, I guess, countermeasures or anything that you could have done? I mean, I know you couldn't go into that city and that sort of thing, but you all had one assignment. Were there other people involved that did that were, part of a unit that could track down those groups, or was it just too chaotic?
Into the zone that they had him, it was completely a terror zone. So even if we had a system like the surveillance detection guys, everybody who goes in and out of that zone is known to be part of the cell.
Okay. Yeah.
So any other individual, and that's why we could take it up to that point, but there was no way anybody could go any further without also becoming collateral damage.
Yeah.
Brian, we had such talented people there. The contractors, they were, former special forces from all the different areas. Brilliant, real exceptional operators. And unfortunately, we had a lot of military people too who had become psychologically dependent or maybe reliant on the military for keeping an eye on them and keeping them safe. But every once in a while, an incident would occur that required some intervention. Big army, it was our army is huge there, and it was. And so when somebody got in trouble, they would count on maybe big army flying in, picking them up and taking them away. But they were so busy that they started to rely on my blue helicopters for rescue purposes. And when we would find out that somebody had put themselves into a situation of jeopardy, we would notify Big Army, if they were military, and say, this person is in trouble and this is their location. Can you get them? And they would say, man, it's going to take us 30 minutes to get there. Can you help? And so my guys would look at me and they'd say, let us do it. And I'd say, get the birds up and go. And within 3 minutes, we'd have them and be safely taking them back. But one incident that occurred, which I've always found interesting, about the green zone, and we had controlled areas for access into the green zone because that's where we all were, and we wanted to protect that. Outside of that was the red zone, and that was cowboy country. So one day, a female Army major, I believe, was driving a car around, I suppose just kind of looking over the green zone and the areas that she'd heard about or was curious about. And without even realizing it, she passed through the control area and found herself into the red zone. And about a mile away from safety. And immediately she was surrounded. They were all pointing weapons at her. And they wanted her to get out of the car. And she knew what was going to happen if she did. Number one, she's military. Number two, she's a woman. It's not going to be good. And we, while she's in the car, she radioed and notified the situation. So Big Army said, we just don't have the resources to get to her. So I told my guys, get the birds up, go get her. So when you see a little bird with two big machine guns sticking out the doors, and you can put several of them up there, that's a kind of firepower that you don't want to resist. You're not. It's not going to end up well. And so my guys, they went and they actually landed and pointed the weapons at the terrorists, and got out and pointed their M4s at them as well, and told them to all back off. Well, we were able to get her out of her car, into a chopper, and fly away to recovery. But it was within minutes of her car being lit on fire with her inside. And another incident where my guys showed their true color. We had a group that was also, they were caught in the red zone. They retreated into a building and were surrounded in that building. Well, actually they surrounded the front part of it and demanded that they come out or they were going to start shooting up the building. They radioed to us, and so we caused a distraction operation where you've got a building, then you've got them in a semicircle, and then we came in behind the semicircle so that they had to turn around. And we started negotiating with them, and the negotiation, of course, is we're going to blow you to hell if you don't back off. But there was quite a few of them. It would have been a hell of a fight. And in the meantime, we had a couple of birds that came in low, unseen, not above the building level, on the backside. We evacuated the people out of the back, got them in the choppers, flew away, and then the ones in the front said, all right, we're done. And they left. Yeah. And the terrorists were left with an empty building and no satisfaction.
So do you think that, I mean, this is kind of a simple question, but do you think that what you all were able to establish there, like that, little birds, almost like quick reactionary forces, quick extractions, could be modeled elsewhere? Or did it? I mean, did people kind of,
I'm sure it has been and still is.
Yeah, good. I was hoping that was going to be the answer and not, well, everything just kind of, went back to normal play instead of building on that, that type of, I guess, like cohesion, that ability to identify the problem, communicate, and then get people with weapons on the ground to extract people. It kind of turns my stomach when it's like, we've got a situation, but we can't get people there.
It didn't always work out well, though, Brian.
Yeah.
We ran protection details, and that's why I think I had 7,000 people I was responsible for. I think it was the second largest army in the country. And one of the main things that we were responsible for was protecting the officers as they would go meet with the various Iraqi ministers, trying to redevelop Iraq. And the oil ministry was obviously one of them that we were at a lot. So we had a lot of weaponry resources that would be staged in advance of the visit, and vehicles, protective detail of vehicles that would protect the car that were taking the officer to the meeting and back. We'd put 50 caliber snipers on the nearby buildings. We had people all around. We had choppers in the air. And on one particular day, a guy who I used to work in the gym with every morning, big, strong, stocky guy, he was one of the snipers. And he was on top of a building, and we had taken the officer into the oil ministry, which, I mean, you pile sandbags on all the walls and the windows, but you keep a space that you can see out the window. And we got word that terrorist forces in mass were starting to move in towards that building, knowing that we were there. My friend that was on top of the building was taking out other snipers that were bad snipers on top of other buildings that were shooting at him. But he got hit in the center mass by a 50 caliber round. And we had to get our officer, and we did a hot touch on a helicopter is where they come in on a top of a building and just one rail touches onto the building, and then you jump in and you take off. So it's just a hot come and go. And we got him out, and I'll talk about what happened to him later. But we told the minister, we said, they're moving in on your position. We've got the detail. They're telling him, we got to go now. Got to go now or we're not going to get out of here. And so the officers were smart enough to know that nobody wanted to die and he needed to listen to them. So they went out, got in the vehicles, and started to move on. Well, they found themselves in an ambush. And they were blocked front and back, and a tall building off to the left of the direction they were going had snipers that were shooting down at them. And so they were stuck. They were really just stuck. A little bird came in, 4 people, 2 shooters, 2 pilots, and they got shot down. So we wanted to retrieve our guys as well as get our people off the X, off the trouble zone. The first thing we had to do was to get the people off, get them moving again. And so we were in a firefight for probably 40 minutes. And probably a lot of people don't realize that your ammo is very heavy. Mm-hmm. You take what seems to be a lot of magazines and a lot of ammo with you, but you burn through it fast. Mm-hmm. And so they were out of ammo. They were pinned down and in a lot of trouble. So we called Big Army and we said, we've got a building that is filled with terrorists and it's supposed to be an empty building and we can't move. We need help. And within a couple of minutes, an Apache helicopter with Hellfire rockets came in, fired 2 rockets at that building, and took the entire building down. Mm. And we were able to get our people off the X. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we then went in looking for the downed helicopter personnel. They'd been stripped of their clothing, dragged around, and they were all dead, of course. Mm-hmm. But at least we were able to get them out of there. So it didn't always end well. Mm-hmm. That's the nature of war.
Yeah. Now, when you rotated out of Iraq, and I know a lot more happened, but when you rotated out of Iraq, was that towards the end of your career, or did you come back and do more years elsewhere?
I had more years elsewhere. When I finished Iraq, they actually asked me to go back to Pakistan.
Okay.
And instead of being in Karachi, because the consulate general was in Karachi and the embassy was in Islamabad. And mm-hmm. now they wanted me to go back and take over the whole country, so I would be in Islamabad. And so I did. I had a lot of experience, a lot of contacts there. And it was beneficial for the government as well as myself to go back. The man who had been the chief of police for Sindh and Baluchistan provinces when I'd been in Karachi had helped me with the Daniel Pearl case, mm-hmm. had been my friend. We had had dinner together. We really had become buddies. By the time I got to Islamabad, he had become the head of the police for the entire country. Mm. And no one had been able to get a meeting with Kamal. The CIA wanted to talk to him. FBI wanted to talk to him. Everybody wanted to get some time with him for their own particular needs. And the ambassador there, who was Ann Patterson, maybe one of my very favorite ambassadors, so sharp. She went to a meeting where he was speaking to all the various ambassadors that were represented in the capital, Islamabad. He said, and I understand that we now have an old friend of mine who's back as the head of security for the embassy, Ambassador Patterson. She poked her head up and was, so she came back and she told me, she said, Kamal mentioned you in this meeting. And I hadn't even thought about the fact that he was now in Islamabad. So I called him and he said, come over, let's have lunch, let's do this. And of course, the CIA, FBI, everybody wanted to be in on that, but he wanted nothing to do with it because we'd gone through a lot together in Karachi. But going back to Islamabad was made easier by Kamal Shah. Because he allowed me again he gave me great autonomy. He allowed me to do things that a foreign special agent would not normally be allowed to do. When I heard about when there was a shooting, I went to the shooting. When there was a bombing, I went to the bombing. We had a restaurant where a couple of FBI guys got blown up, and one of them, his entire front of his scalp was blown back. And I'm on the spot, and they're helping me to conduct the investigation. So it was pretty. Well, it was a real benefit, and you see that if you establish proper channels, friendships, and communication at other places, it can come back and be a benefit to you. So I did do other tours, and then after that, they said, "We want you to go someplace where it's not quite what you've been going through for the last couple of decades." And I said, "Well, is Bangkok available? I could use some good food and some happy people."
Yeah.
And they said, "It is. It's not your rank. It's one level down, but if you want to take it, we'll let you do it." And then once I was there, I thought, I've been doing this stuff for quite a while. Maybe I'll think about retiring or doing one more tour and then retiring. And as it turned out, that was going to be my final tour, which coincidentally, I met my wife.
Well, it all worked out, right?
Yeah, because I don't think she would have wanted to go on to another tour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Randall, I appreciate your time today. There's going to be some future episodes because we got into Iraq, and right now we're fighting the clock, unfortunately. But I want to bring you back on. We'll do some more talking about different assignments you did. I always love talking to you, and I appreciate it. For people who are listening, if you've got questions, if you've got anything that you want to reach out to, shoot it straight to me on an email at thedisruptors.bc.ski@gmail, and I'll forward it on to Randall, as well as any other topics that you would want to hear him talk on. Or if you've got his book and you've read it, shoot me some information and what you thought of it. I appreciate your time, Randall. I've got something cooking in the future, almost like mini episodes of book reviews. And so we'll also do an episode like that where we'll go very specifically into a review of your book, maybe by some other people, if you've got time for that. So
very cool. Thank you,
yes,
Brian.
sir.
I appreciate your time.
Yes, sir, buddy. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Disruptors out.